$65, and consideration of acceptance of $4,570 from the Winchester Sports Foundation for Winchester Unified Bowling. Followed by consideration of approval of the superintendent's recommended FY26 budget, then report, update, and action items, including a review of the Green Communities Project Funding Assistance request for $31,060.47 for the McCall Middle School, an update on the Morocco MSBA Statement of Interest, anticipated future agenda items, next meetings, and adjournment. So with that, we have a tight schedule today, as we will need to wrap up, I believe, by 5:35. And so we will begin with public comment. If you have anything, well, let me just move to attendees. If you are here for public comment, please raise your digital hand. And I will, let me just see, I think Mr. Marin is about to bring up the little preamble. Oop. I made it very large on my screen, so now I can no longer see it. Let me just see this. Okay. All right. Public comment shall be for a period of 20 minutes. Any citizen wishing to speak before the committee shall identify themselves by name and address and shall speak for no longer than 3 minutes. All remarks will be addressed through the chair of the meeting, and public comment is not a discussion, debate, or dialogue between citizens and the committee. It's a citizen's opportunity to express their opinion on issues of school committee business. Written comments longer than 3 minutes may be presented to the school committee before or after the meeting for the committee members' review and consideration at an appropriate time. And those remarks may be submitted to schoolcommittee@winchesterps.org. So I see that we have a number of hands raised. And Mr. Hopcroft, if you could help with running the list of names and then also perhaps keeping track of timing. And then also, I just wanted to make note that we have all our school committee members here, but some of us had to be off camera. So I don't think that they may show up on the list of participants, but we are all here.
Great. So looking at the hands raised, Erica Walsh is the first one. So if we could elevate her, that will start the timer when she starts speaking. If you can elevate her, and then if you can turn on your camera and microphone.
Hi. Okay.
So go ahead.
Very good. All right. Thank you. Hi, I'm Erica Walsh, and I live at 64 Wedgemere Avenue. So first, I want to thank the school committee for your service to our community and your commitment to our children's education and success. Your time and dedication are deeply appreciated. I'm here today to support a bell-to-bell phone-free policy in our schools K through 12. I wanted to share some recent data. According to a study that was just published in JAMA Pediatrics this past January, teens are spending an average of 1.5 hours on their smartphones during school hours, with 25% of students logging more than 2 hours on their phones during the school day. Instagram, TikTok, and messaging apps were among the most popular platforms, pulling teens into social feeds and chats during school hours, according to the study. I understand that the policies for the 2025-2026 school handbook will be up for discussion this spring. And I urge the committee to look at the current cell phone policy in our schools, specifically the high school, and consider whether an alternative approach could better serve our students. While we know smartphones are currently a part of our teens' lives, could we make academic time sacred? Sacred for developing deep concentration, resilience, and the kind of mental stamina that will serve our kids for life. Focus is like a muscle, and mental stamina is a skill. If we want our kids to be strong thinkers, we must give them the right environment to build those habits so they can carry them forward into college, their careers, and beyond. The Winchester Public Schools mission statement is to provide all students with high quality, nurturing, and challenging educational environment. one that fosters academic achievement, healthy social and emotional development, and a lifelong love of learning. And I asked, can we achieve those stated mission goals while also welcoming smartphones into school classrooms, hallways, passing times, lunchrooms, and hangout areas? While I'm aware that pushback on phone policies is often coming from parents who want to get a hold of their children during the school day, schools that have implemented bell-to-bell phone policies have reported both parents and students have been overwhelmingly supportive, especially when communication of the benefits is made clear through the entire process. In closing, I wanted to share that over 250 Winchester parents have signed a letter in support of a bell-to-bell phone-free policy in the last 2 weeks that I'd be happy to share with you. So there is a lot of support in this community, and I look forward to keeping this conversation open. And if there's anything I can do to support the process, I'd be happy to. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank
so
you.
much.
You did a very good job coming in just under 3 minutes. So thank you. And feel free, people can send in written comments if they want to the committee. All right, next up is Carol Savage. So if we can elevate her.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
can
could
hear you, we
please
can't
turn
see
on
you.
your camera? Oh,
There
thank
you go.
Hi.
Now we can see you too.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi. So you can hear?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you. I'll try to be quick. I just wanted to comment a little bit about where we are in the
Ms.
plan
Savage, could
process.
you also just introduce yourself and then also give your address, please?
Oh, Carol Savage, 5 Lakeview Road.
Thank
and
you.
I'm a town meeting member. And I'm mostly speaking to you as a town meeting member and also as a former parent of kids in the Winchester school system who is very familiar with sort of this process and have been very familiar with this budget process for the last probably 3 decades. So I've made a comment to, and I've spoken to some of you about this, that this year's process for the budget is not following the typical timeline. And I want to thank you for posting the recordings of all of your budget subcommittee meetings, because I had not seen those, but I did take the time to watch them all. So it's very helpful to have them there. So I understand that you talked a lot about modifying the budget timing process this year. That said, I do think there's merit to the sequence of the process being that the school committee submits a budget to the town manager compiles it, sends it to the finance committee who reviews it and then takes it to town meeting. So I think that sequence is part of the budget process in our town charter, and it's an important process. Whether or not we need to revisit that you will have enough time on the front end and that front deadline could be pushed out further is worthy of some conversation. But I think that sequence matters a lot, and where we go from here is really important for the community and for the quality of dialogue that we have in town meeting. So there's a level services budget that's been submitted, and now you're going to be voting on some additional requests, I think later in this meeting. I think that I can say from my own perspective that when I heard in the budget summit that there might be a supplemental request, I assumed it was going to have to do with literacy, because we're all aware, I think the community is aware that this is a challenge that you're working on. And I think that there will be broad support in the community to address it. So I thank you for the work you're doing on that. Whether or not the other incremental requests that are coming are as urgent or could have been anticipated early in the process, I think is a question that I think that will need to be decided upon. But I think the process matters and the sequence of the process matters. And I also want to say this to this committee as well as to the finance committee, that it is really important that these two committees work in a collaborative fashion to look at this budget, and see where, it's mostly personnel costs that are driving the budget. And I'm well aware of the kind of pressures that the school budget has. So I would really hope that both the Finance Committee and the School Committee can work together to really look at sort of where's the money now being spent, where are the gaps? I know you're working on a strategic planning process. Where this year's requests fall relative to that. I'm sure my time is about running out, but
You're just over
so
3 minutes. So if you could wrap up, that'd be good.
no, just, I mean, priority on the literacy. I think if there's any incremental requests, priority on the literacy, it would get my vote. So thank you. And thank you for your work you're doing.
Thank you, Ms. Savage. Next on the list is Katie O'Connor.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi. Yes. Great. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. My name's Katie O'Connor. I live at 72 Wedgmere Ave. And I'm just making my comment to echo the sentiments that Erica expressed a few minutes ago. Next year, I'll have 4 children in the Winchester Public School System, 3 at VO and 1 at McCall. And Karen, I think in the League of Women Voters, your stated goal was to create an environment where every student can reach their full potential through our school system, which I think it's an admirable goal. And I agree, it's so important. I guess I would argue that having no formal policy around personal devices at school works against that goal. Smartphones are devices that are designed to be distracting, to keep our eyes on their algorithmically generated content. They really fragment our students' attention and prevent them from doing the important deep concentration and work that's necessary to be successful academically in high school and beyond. So for this reason, I would encourage the school committee to revisit the policy in our handbook to consider a phone-free bell-to-bell policy for K through 12. And I just wanted to end with saying that schools that have done this have seen improved academics, increased engagement, fewer fights and cyberbullying, stronger relationships, and most importantly and happily, more laughter and interaction between students in the hallway. So I just think that would be an excellent environment to create for our students, and it's an easy thing to do. There are many school districts and even states across the country who have led the way in this effort, and I would love for us as a community to join them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I do not see any more hands raised, Madam Chair, so I believe we can close public comment after this.
Right. I do not see any more hands raised either. So with that, I will close public comment. I'm going to rearrange my screens a little bit so I can see. And let's move on to the next item of business, which is the consent agenda. And just again, consideration of approval for WHS students to attend the Massachusetts Junior Classical League State Convention in Barnstable, Mass, April 11th and 12th. Acceptance of $3,200 from the State Treasurer's Financial Education Innovation Fund to support the Credit for Life Fair at WHS. Consideration of acceptance of the WIFI grants totaling $83,065, and consideration of acceptance of $4,570 from the Winchester Sports Foundation for WHS Unified Bowling.
Madam Chair, I'd be happy to make a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented with thanks to the grant donors.
And I would second that.
Thank you. And all in favor? Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
Mr. Hopcroft,
Aye.
Ms. Bergstrom,
Aye.
and Dr. Matthews.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye, and the vote is unanimous. And much appreciation to, as other members were saying, to all of the donors, and a big shout out, I think, to WIFI for always being so generous with their grants to the school system. They help on the educator side and on student innovation side, and it's always an honor to be the recipient of all these grants.
Madam Chair, I have one request following that vote.
Yes.
Could the superintendent forward a little more detail to the committee on the AI professional development that was included in that packet as part of the WIFI funding? I was not able to find a whole lot of detail. Learned a lot about who's leading it, but just didn't find a lot of detail about the subject matter.
Great, thank
Thank
you.
you.
And without further ado, we will move directly into consideration of approval of the superintendent's recommended FY26 budget. And Dr. Hackett, I will turn it over to you and Mr. Marin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, good afternoon, everybody. I guess it's not even yet. Just feels like a long day. We have gone over this budget multiple times, and you all are, I think, quite familiar. But we are down now to bringing forward a recommendation that is above and beyond the level service budget that you voted in January and sent to the town manager, which has been under consideration and review by FinCom and various bodies. And I thought it would be helpful just to share that all the documents that were related to the budget, including the presentations that you have seen in the committee that have been done both with budget subcommittee as well as the school committee. Eventually, the one that you're seeing tonight is on our finance webpage, including all of the links to the recordings of the meetings, as well as the presentations. And this has been on this website now since we began the process in October. So there has been plenty of information for people to be able to take a look at. You can see we went back to just October with a beginning of budget subcommittee. And then as well, you can also find the UMDI, UMass Donahue Institute enrollment study information, as well as a little bit above that, you'll see the FY26 preliminary level services budget detail. So that link is actually line by line detail of all the items within the level services budget. After this evening, depending on the vote of the committee, we'll also add the FY26 school committee approved recommended budget. So just wanted to make sure that everyone continues to be aware of that. We worked pretty hard to keep everybody up to date and keep all the information available for the public. So with that, we're going to, in the interest of time and the fact that you have seen much of this presentation through the last several months or a few months anyway, we're going to try to just kind of keep this relatively focused on and not spend a lot of time on background information you already have and just really kind of get to the recommendations. So I thought maybe I would start with the actual end in mind. If Mr. Marin, if you could go to the second to the last slide. Sorry, that's a little bit of a curveball there. Whoops, sorry, slide 10, please. Thank you. So what I am recommending to you tonight as the budget for your consideration for adoption is on the bottom line there, superintendent recommended budget with tier 1, and we'll talk about the tier 1 priorities in just a few minutes, of $70,505,138, which represents a 6.59% increase. This budget is it represents all of the recommendations related to the literacy pilot and literacy PD that you have seen as part of the earlier recommendations that we had spelled out. So I just thought we'd start there because when I go to buy a vehicle, I kind of like to know what the total price is before I start trying to figure out what all the details are, what's included in the car. So I just want to make sure that we start there so you have some kind of work backwards from that point. So if we can go back to earlier slide, I think we can go right to, yeah. So just briefly, as you know, and to some of the comments around just the timeline of the process, I will just reiterate what I've said publicly in other places, that the ability to have time with this budget has been incredibly helpful. And I think not just helpful for us administratively and for you as a committee, but more importantly, it's been helpful for us to be able to get really true and high quality data and feedback from both our staff, our students, and our community around what they value, what they believe this school system should represent, what they believe the school system should include in program, and how we should support our students and our teachers. So without that time, we really would not have been able to get to this level of engagement. And as I have said before, from a budget perspective and building a budget, this has been the timeline we have in Winchester has been difficult in that we actually, it's hard to do much with budget until you get into really into January. And then we essentially have, especially when you have a year when we don't have negotiated contracts completed, and then we have essentially about 3 or 4 weeks to really bring all of it together. Now we do a lot of pre-work through October, through November, through December, but to get to the point where we really have solidified recommendations and have information for you to share with you, for you to have discussion on. The months of November and December, as you know, are busy, busy for a lot of reasons, and there's a lot of business the school committee conducts outside of just the budget. So it has been a challenge to in thinking, and one of the ways I've just come to think about it is that you actually have less time with your budget than other committees do in time in town. And I think that that's just the way the process is. I think the modification, which I think it is a modification, and that's all that it is, of having you consider the level services budget, have you vote that budget as per charter by the end of January, and that we have provided the town manager with that budget on the timeline that's in the charter, stayed in place. And we've been very clear about the fact that that is the starting point for our budget. This would not be the first time. In fact, the last 2 years, the committee has revoted a budget number through the course of the spring when new information became available to us about special education tuitions or changes in other costs or retirements. You have actually the last 2 years in a row revoted the budget that you voted and sent to the town manager in January. And in fact, you have done that as late as April, I believe, in 1 year, because it just makes sense to make sure that you're coming to the town meeting floor with a budget that accurately reflects all the information, the best information we have at the time that we have it. And so much happens between January and May that it is just completely unknowable from September to January 30th. So that this additional time has allowed us to, I think, to refine a budget to the point where we have a high level of confidence where we are. We have a good handle on our projected expenditures. With some exceptions, of course, and there is always the chance that there'd be changes, but we face that every year. So just quickly take you through the survey that we did. We did 3 surveys. We did 2 surveys actually with staff and the community. And this just shows the level of participants. We had 293 participate in the staff survey, which I can tell you is I think is very impressive. I think there's a high number for staff surveys as staff surveys go. We had in the process there were 227 staff thoughts presented, 681 school community thoughts presented, and then we'll go through that process. We've been through it several times. This is through our software thought exchange, but through that process, the staff rated. Provided 7,900 different ratings on those 227 thoughts. And the community provided over 30,000 ratings on the 681 thoughts. That's a tremendous amount of feedback. We received some great feedback and great information and suggestions about some of the challenges of this survey. This was our first run through. This is a big change in our process. I don't think there's been this level of engagement, certainly not in this way, which is what Thought Exchange allows, is just massive engagement that it would be very difficult to get in any other way. So we've learned from the process. We're going to refine it and we're going to get better at it, but we will continue to gather information from community and staff in this way to help inform our decisions. You have this in your slide deck. There are some common themes that were pulled out between both the community and the staff survey. The major headers were curriculum and professional development, staffing, and the need for more support, classroom support, special education support. There was commonality around co-curricular and extracurricular activities, and also included in not a co-curricular, but support for arts and humanities, trying to enhance those programs. Theater program and the visual performing arts came up a lot, as well as technology. And interesting to the comments around the cell phone, we certainly appreciate, and we have had several meetings around and conversations around cell phone policies. And as one of the speakers point out, we'll have the handbooks coming up later in the spring. So stay tuned for that. So to get to the recommended FY26 budget, we created a list of priorities, and this is what actually is represented by in the superintendent recommended budget that I showed you the bottom line earlier. We have prioritized all of the items related to the literacy pilot program, the professional development that pilot will include, as well as additional literacy professional development that is related to literacy, but not specific to the pilot program. And we also we are committed to 2 separate data systems. One that is will help us manage DIBELS information. It's a very powerful software platform that allows us to look at the data in different ways, teachers to look at the data in different ways, to really break it down, to understand where students are in with that screener, and to actually come up with recommendations and for intervention and plans for intervention. We've also have committed to an investment in a multi-tiered support system software package that will include DIBELS data pulling from that application, but more importantly, will go beyond just literacy and be able to bring in data around, for example, from any source, whether it's MCAS, whether it's DIBELS, whether it's some other assessment that we use. They can include grade information, AP information. So it can handle a variety of different data sources and points that allows us to really be able to analyze student performance over multiple sources of data, which is always our goal, including our local data and our performance-based assessments. And also allows for, it does have a progress monitoring component that is applicable to the MTSS system, which would be inclusive of DIBELS, but also go beyond just DIBELS information, even with our literacy assessments. So we have provided a projected cost for you of $455,000. We talked at some length around the literacy program pilot. I shared with you that the range of costs for just the pilots in the 7 programs that are being looked at right now, which will be honed down to hopefully 2 shortly for piloting for next year. Some of the costs can range from 0, no money at all, to implement the pilot, to $500,000. So we are currently carrying a $300,000 figure. We hope to know more about the pilot programs that we'll be looking at next year before we get to town meeting, and we'll make any necessary adjustments to that number. We are heavily emphasizing the fact that we are going to provide full professional development around these pilots. We will be treating these pilots as if we were adopting each one of those programs with a full slate of professional development that would come with the program if we were actually implementing this. So that will include quite a bit of external, outside professional development and support. Some will be, and probably I don't want to say the majority, quite a bit of it will be from the actual companies that actually would be providing the resources and the materials. But that does not mean that we will not also potentially be bringing in some other consultants to help provide smooth implementation, so we can really get a good look at the 2 programs we're piloting. There will be an evaluation system in place that will include making sure that by the time we get to the end of the pilot period, we have good data on the effectiveness from our teachers' perspective, from our student perspective, and also from our parent community perspective on the programs themselves. Then that would be in preparation for FY27, that we would be looking to put together a budget and come to you with a recommendation from the ELT regarding which program or programs potentially we would be looking to implement. These are the core programs. We also are hearing a lot of information from the ELT that I think there is kind of an acceptance that there is no one program that's going to work by itself, that we will have likely supplementary materials that will be going along with whatever pilot program that ends up being chosen. So there will be some cost beyond just the actual program itself. Literacy professional development, this would be really foundational literacy practices. We really feel that it's important for us to make sure that all of our staff, or as many staff as we can at the elementary level, can have an opportunity to kind of participate in fundamental literacy and skills instruction. We certainly know that many of our staff don't necessarily need to have a foundational course, but we think it's really important that we get everyone kind of on the same page and at least have some common language. It's been extremely helpful, even as we have used UFly over the last course of this year, for our teachers to be able to have conversations around their experiences with students with that program and the language of that program. While I've just on that point, I would just also say it's also important for everybody to know that we will continue to use UFly next year as we're doing these pilot programs. And the pilot programs will not be piloted by everybody. Teachers will be asked to volunteer. It is a lot of work. I think there is a lot of enthusiasm from behalf of our teachers to participate in that pilot. So we're really excited to launch that. But all teachers at the elementary level, at the lower elementary level, earlier grades, will be using UFly, continue to use UFly next year, which they have been pleased with from the feedback that we've received. I'll stop there. Let's see if anyone has any questions. I think I see a hand.
Just a quick clarification, Dr.
Yes.
Hackett. Whatever we're piloting is not going to replace UFly, but as you talked about supplemental programs to the program we may choose, the pilots are to supplement UFly, correct? So UFly will remain in place no matter what we pilot.
Yes, for next
Is that
year,
correct?
correct. Yes, that's what I was trying to say. Yes, thank you. Yep.
Okay.
Yes, we'll continue to use UFly for next year. UFly may continue. I mean, even though it's not on the list of pilot programs, it is being used, and we have actually been piloting it for a full year, and some teachers for longer than that. Because if you remember, one of the reasons why we selected UFly was because through the survey, we found that a lot of our teachers were already using UFly. So it just made
Correct.
sense to continue using UFly. So that is in play for beyond just next year, but everyone will continue to use it for next year.
So no matter, even if we're piloting additional things, if we're seeing success with UFly and staff is finding success with it and we're seeing DIBELS data to back it up, whatever we're choosing may be on top of that.
It very well could be on top of that. Yes.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And finally, so that those total, you can see the 455. We've also included a column to the right because we have some level of confidence that there's potential for some outside funding of some of these items. In fact, have been in discussion already with a couple of potential funding sources, and we are looking at even though we understand that the first two, the pilot literacy program and the professional development, the $300,000 and the $100,000 aren't really, they will likely be ongoing costs. For next year, we're treating these like they could be one-time costs. Certainly we're not going to pilot beyond next year. So the $300,000 for pilot will go away to be replaced more than likely by a recommendation for a literacy program that could exceed 300,000, could be lower than 300,000, but that this pilot program is a one-year program. So as well as while literacy professional development, we want to continue to provide funding for that professional development because it's critical. this is really kind of, from our perspective, kind of a baseline boost around professional development around literacy. We may not need $100,000 for literacy professional development in following years, but we'll let the year kind of inform that as we build into FY27. But we do believe that potentially some outside funding could support that for a year. In fact, as you are aware, there might be an article on the warrant to provide some professional development, for example. And I know that there's some other organizational interest in helping to support some of this. So suffice it to say, that last column just is a potential for what we could be, what might be actually the net result of the impact on our budget. I'm not recommending that you vote the $205,000 as part of the operating budget. I'm recommending that you vote the full 455. And then if we are able to secure funding, then once again we can come back to the committee prior to town meeting, and we can recommend adjustments if we think that we are able to do so. So I'm happy to answer any questions around that. I just would ask Mr. Maron if you could pull up the full priorities list. So we have spent a lot of time building out, as promised, with meeting after meeting with the budget subcommittee, with internal meetings, building out a 5-year plan that is associated and attached to our WPS 2030 plan. So we have really focused on our strategic plan for the next 5 years, our 2030 plan. You can see that on the top half of this, that $455,000 that we just talked about are the recommended priorities, and they are specific to the literacy pilot and professional development for literacy. You can see the goal area associated with each one of these. As you know, we have 3 goal areas, and each one of these is labeled out for to what goal it is associated with. There's a small description to the left of that on what each one of these items are. And then you can see to the right, there's the fiscal year pull down. And then you can see the category of expenditure that it is. So whether it's personnel or other expenses, if there are any FTEs associated with it, you see that in column F. And finally, for the projected costs. So if we continue to scroll down a little bit, we'll just show you the next tier of priorities that were under consideration, that were not part of my recommended budget at this time. For clearly, this is your evening to have this discussion, so I'm going to wrap up my comments fairly quickly. Those are the level 2 tier priorities. You can see what they are. I think they're all pretty clear, what they're associated with, what the costs are, projected costs are, and the goal area that they support. Tier 2 would include 6.5 FTEs, full-time equivalent positions. And tier two priorities come up to a value of $623,000. And then not just for tonight's discussion, but Mr. Maron, if you could just scroll down through the rest of this, you can see that we have built out FY27. We have built out FY28 and 29 and all the way through 29. Understanding that just like an enrollment study, that further years you get out, things can change, and we're not suggesting that this is locked in stone, but we did spend a lot of time on this and really thinking through our goals, what are our priorities, and what do we think is important. You'll see, for example, in the level 2 priorities, which the McCall schedule implementation, which has been a lot of work around the schedule discussion with McCall staff, and mathematics, additional mathematics support, and some additional professional development that is outside of literacy. So with that, I'm going to stop. Mr. Mayor, if you could, I don't know, I'll leave it to the chair, wherever you want to go with this. I know that Mr. Nixon has a question, so I'm done.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I think with that, we'll open it up to discussion from the committee members. So Mr. Nixon, I see your hand is raised.
I do. So I have some comments in general about the superintendent's recommendation that I'll hold for a moment in case committee members have sort of detailed questions about some items on the spreadsheet. That's where I wanted to start. If I could ask Mr. Maron or Dr. Hackett just to scroll down a little bit to tier 2. I think I saw Winchester High School general classroom 2 FTEs. If you could scroll down just a little bit more. I just want to make the point that historically in Winchester, when we've been faced with significant enrollment growth, this was a place we were quickly putting investment to keep up with student growth. We frequently think of this in the elementary frame because kids spend so much of their day in one particular classroom. Of course, that's not the case at the high school. However, for those who haven't been watching all of our meetings, we're projecting next year it's the largest number of students at Winchester High School since the renovation even began. Every year, for the next few years, we are going to be increasingly above and beyond the design capacity of Winchester High School. So I wondered, Dr. Hackett, can you just speak for a moment about that 2.0 FTE that says it's enrollment driven? Is this, there are class size limitations that's in the CBA for which there may be relief when those numbers are exceeded. Is this about sort of maintaining class sizes, or is it even more nuanced? Does this mean, would this investment mean we have more students able to access more curriculum because we're able to offer courses and blocks that we could not otherwise offer?
I'm happy to let Dr. Ellenham weigh in on this too, but I would say, Mr. Nixon, it's really both. We do have the class size guidelines that we adhere to. I can also tell you that there are teachers who willingly accept more students than the class size guidelines because they feel that strongly about the class and the content they're teaching. They but it would be both to make sure that we are maintaining reasonable the class sizes as well as additional, which is also part of that is additional sections, as you know. So if we have a singleton AP class, for example, and it's offered one time in the schedule, and then it's the only time that students can get it, to have a couple offerings to be able to have students loosen up their schedule to be able to access it would be helpful. But it is about both really making sure that class sizes are reasonable and manageable, as well as potentially providing some additional sections of courses that we have maybe don't even have. We don't have a lot of electives outside of the academic areas, but I don't know if Dr. Ellen wants to weigh in on that at all. I know she's been working with the high school level.
I think you captured it well, and certainly we'll have to see as they've done course selections and figure out how many sections we need of each one and staffing around that. Some of it will go to that, and then some of it is a huge number of students have study halls in their schedule that really chose an elective that we just couldn't get them into. And so our hope is to be able to get more students into the courses that they're desiring to attend if they are not looking for a study hall in place of that.
All right, I appreciate that. I think it's important for us to understand what's driving this request. I appreciate why it falls in this location on the spreadsheet. I guess going back to sort of the more holistic impression or comment I would make, I'm very much supportive of Dr. Hackett's recommendation for the additional increase of $455,000. But I wanted to say something. I want to be very clear about something. The school committee, I think we all recognize we have to play in the financial sandbox. We are the largest component of the municipal budget. To the comments made by Ms. Savage, I would echo what Dr. Hackett said. We did discuss a budget. We voted a budget. We sent it to Ms. Rudolph. She turned her budget out on February 15th. If for folks who've not yet read the town manager's report for FY26, you should do so. It's on her webpage. It's excellent. Her cover letter speaks to so many constraints that we're struggling with right now, including, by the way, an expectation that healthcare costs would rise by as much as 17%. And then she found out weeks later it's 18.92%. Ms. Rudolph and her team are going to be working very hard over the coming weeks and months to try to get that number down. There are so many pressures, right, on the overall budget. I think she very ably describes the select board's policy for operating reserves at 6 to 10% of general revenue. And she's got a very interesting chart that shows, based on, optimistic assumptions, pessimistic assumptions, and something in the middle, how far out we can go before we kind of dip under that select board policy of 6 to 10%. And I I interpreted her narrative and her report as very much about looking at a 3-year time frame. And I think, although it may actually be more like a 2-year time frame, depending upon how assumptions play out and what costs we ultimately have to entertain. Here's what struck me is that her current budget, which anybody can find on the website, includes a drawdown of $3.58 million in free cash to get to the budget. And her calculation is almost 15.6% is the reserves. And remember, we have a policy of 6 to 10. If my math is close to right, and an increase in the school budget of 455 would drop that percentage from 15.6 to 15.3. So that's still comfortably above the select board policy. I don't have I'm much less worried about the impact that this would have on FY26. I'm much more mindful a lot of what this means in 27 and 28. And I think Ms. Rudolph again does a nice job sort of framing that conversation that we'll have to have about alternative revenue sources, including an override in some measure. I just want to offer, if I may, the language from Moody's. If nobody has yet read what Moody's wrote, they just assigned us a AAA rating for our general obligation municipal bonds on February 20th. Moody's says that their AAA rating reflects Winchester's very strong local economy outside of Boston. Resident income and wealth are very strong compared to peers. Management reports ongoing development in the town that will be positive to the area. Reserves are satisfactory and stable. FY24 ending fund balance net of ban activity was in line with the previous year. FY25 operations should be stable as well as operations are trending well to budget. The town has ongoing capital plans, but overall leverage will remain affordable, especially given an anticipated decline in pension contributions when it plans to be fully funded in 28. That note being we're about to redirect our funding for pensions towards OPEB next year. And Ms. Rudolph speaks to that as well in her letter very, very well. So my remark would be this. I did not move to Winchester for our bond rating, but I appreciate very much that we have it, and I understand the value that it brings to all that we do. I think our AAA bond rating is really a consequence of the thoughtful fiscal management that so many people have had a hand in for many years prior to today. And I want to do whatever we need to do to maintain that. And that's going to have to include carefully evaluating some sort of stable revenue or sustainable revenue plan over the next 3 to 4 years. So I'm comfortable with the superintendent's recommendation in the frame of FY26 and, welcome an opportunity to talk about what sort of structural solutions we need to look at for 27, 28 and beyond.
Thank you. Dr. Matthews, you have your hand raised.
I do. Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to, so Dr. Hackett, I guess I'll start by asking you a question, which is the amounts that are in the tier 2, the tier 2 priorities. Are these things that if we choose not to ask town meeting for funding around these, are they things that would necessarily not be able to happen in the coming year if those are not funded? So I'm thinking about things like literacy specialists, math interventionists, things that we've heard about in our meetings that were sort of dire needs that departments have reported to us and would very much like to have in the budget as soon as possible.
I'm not entirely sure. I think I understand your question.
I'm happy to. I just if we don't. Right now on the screen we are looking at a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items, and my understanding is that these are things that could not happen in the coming academic year, which also happens to be our coming fiscal year, in the absence of us funding them through our budget. Is that a true statement?
It is, yeah. I would just say that the items, the mathematic resources, professional development, and the theater program review, those could happen. There could be outside funding that we could find to support those areas, but it would be in competition for the outside funding that we'd be looking for literacy support. But the actual positions, the FTEs, would not be in the budget or fundable unless there was some kind of significant change in a reduction in our anticipated expenditures. And I would just add to what Mr. Nixon's earlier point, and just, one it is I was very mindful in developing this recommendation. If you look at those top items, they're really the only two that would be potentially ongoing costs that we would have to find the money for, really are the applications that we would be installing and putting in place that we just need to have in order to really manage our student assessment data and to be able to really provide the kind of information to our teachers that they need for making the adjustments for their instructional practices with our students. So those two we would continue, but the other two theoretically are one-time expenditures that, as I stated already, would need to be replaced in some form if we were going to adopt a program, and we would be looking to build that into the FY27 budget. So if things did not go well, and if there was an override that didn't pass, for example, we would not be, we're that my recommendation does not include any FTEs, because as we've all have talked about in long-term practice, we do not want to be funding positions with one-time funds. So I try to take a conservative approach and try to really focus on what we know are the priorities for the district based on all the work that we've done and the feedback that we've received. But that's a long way to answer your question, Dr. Matthews, but you're correct that any FTEs associated with the level 2 priorities would not be doable.
So I think the comment that I'll make, that question was a precondition for, is that there are things that we've been asked for this year, which are real needs that we've heard from our educators. And in particular, I think we know a lot about literacy just because it's been a great focus of this year, and the kinds of support that we would need in terms of FTEs, in terms of humans, in terms of actual educators coming in to support the needs of our students, that if we just accept the tier 1 recommendations, are unfortunately not going to be things we can address in the coming academic year, right? So we can talk about fiscal years and we can talk about funding, but I think at the end of the day, we need to make an acknowledgement of the fact that if we choose not to fund things on this list, right, those things will not be happening at the very earliest until fiscal year 2027, which is the fall of 2026. However, we know, based on both what we've learned through the literacy report and what we've heard from our educators, the wonderful elementary math presentation that if folks who are listening haven't seen it, should definitely go back on WinCam and take a look at that. The great presentation we had from our special ed staff around the real sort of material lack of resources that they've perceived there as a result of coming on board in the case of our new special ed director, and sort of just comparing it to what they feel is needed and what they might have experienced in other places in their career. So at least for me, I just want to pick up on something Mr. Nixon said, which is that, I think we all moved to Winchester for specific reasons, right? And probably for most of us, the cornerstone of that was the excellence of our schools. And I personally believe, this may go beyond what you're recommending to us today, but I personally believe that we need to think very hard about whether we want to put some of the items on the tier 2 list off until 2026 and 2027. Solely because of the fact that it's, we only get a once a year opportunity really to come back to this. And when it comes to an amount of money that can't be funded outside by a grant, that really does forestall. It closes off our chance to make that change anytime in the upcoming year. And I personally believe, as a member of the committee who's listened to presentations this year, and looked at the results of the survey from our educators, looked at the results of the survey from our parents, I think there's a real question as to whether it is really going to help us maintain the excellence of our district to not address some of these issues this year. I know it's a big ask, but Mr. Nixon's point about the tiny fraction of free cash that we're actually nudging the town down by doing the tier 1 priorities, the 455, we really, I think, as a committee, have to ask whether another fractional nudge down, in hopes that we're able to pass that override and really have some joy and some positive thinking about making a positive and affirmative case to our town about what we need, for all of our kids, is the best approach. So for me personally, I would love to have a discussion about adding at least a couple of the tier 2 priorities in, but I'm just not sure whether there are other committee members who share that perspective. So I just wanted to put that out there, and in the interest of time, I'll let others comment now, but I'd like to ask the question as to whether there's any interest in potentially talking about things beyond the 455 that would actually be super valuable for our students in the next academic year.
Dr. Hackett, did you have your hand up?
I did. I just want to make a quick clarification because there are people on this call, I'm sure, who may not have been following all 13, 14, 15 meetings that we've had. But I want to make sure to clarify with the committee and for the public that there are items that we had to work back into the level services budget. I just say what they are real quickly. We've included a 1.0 full-time support person for multi-language learners. We've included an additional 0.2 for high school Mandarin programming to essentially be able to offer an advanced placement course next year, and also to address the increased enrollment. We have also included 2 full-time special education teachers in this, in the level services budget, which we need to have, which was on this priority list not too long ago. One is for elementary literacy secret support, and the other one is to support some additional needs at Vincent Owen for next year. So those items are already in there. We also will be looking to fund an out-of-district placement coordinator through grant funds. So we have pulled that out of this list of priorities, and the grant funds we're talking about are funds that would only be usable for that purpose. So I'm going to stop there, but I just want to make sure that I was clear that there are things that have been moved into level services that you're not seeing on this priority list that were there before.
Thank you. Mr. Hopcroft?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Hackett, for that clarification. That's gonna be helpful. As we've gone through this process, there have been a number of items, and the way I rationalize it is, there are things that are required to deliver the level of service that we had before. So whether it's an enrollment growth or legal requirement or otherwise, it's appropriate that be there because it's not discretionary, and so we're not actually making decisions about it right here. So this, yeah, and I'm very cognizant of the fact that we have about 20 minutes of time here, so I do want to cut to the chase a little bit. Everything in lines 2 through 12 here has been a priority that we've heard from the community, very loud and clear, and I agree with Dr. Matthews on that. I appreciate how the thoughtfulness you've put into this and really bundling up the literacy as the very sort of tip of the spear of what needs to get funded, and so I would say I'm absolutely 100% on board for supporting that. In my view, I don't think there's any question there. And I appreciate the looking to external sources to reduce the amount and reduce the burden on taxpayers to the extent that we can. I'll say I share Dr. Matthews' concern and I reflect on Mr. Nixon's context around the broader landscape, free cash, upcoming override, et cetera. And so I'm I guess to answer Dr. Matthews' question, I'm very supportive and think that we should spend our time, if other folks agree on that, 2 through 5 are, if we have sort of consensus of the committee, the 2 through 5 ought to definitely be there. I'd like to talk about 7 through 12, because frankly, I think those were pretty high priorities as well. And if we're able to get some outside funding that knocks that 455 and Mr. Nixon's math down a bit, we can't count on that. So I certainly am in favor of voting the full amount and then adjusting later should money come in. We're talking about a similar scale here. It's almost $500,000 for the first tier and almost $500,000 for the second tier. And so I'd like to have a conversation about leaning in on that. I'll stop there because again, I know time is limited, but maybe I'll be back.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Ms. Bergstrom first because she hasn't had a chance to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Bolognese. Um, Dr. Hackett, can you remind me what the amount is that adds 0.5% to our budget?
So it'd be 1% is about 700,000.
Of
So 350.
700,000 adds an
Yeah.
extra percent to our budget.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So I would agree with Mr. Nixon and Mr. Hopcroft that, and I think Dr. Matthews as well, that the top priorities that you have there, 455,000, are absolutely within our reach and necessary to our students for the next year. When I look at the priorities below that, if we would be able to secure some outside funding, as Mr. Hopcroft mentioned, I guess my priority to ask to you would be, what have we been working on that we need to continue? For example, I noticed the McCall schedule implementation. I know there's been a lot of work going in on this on Dr. Emma's behalf and Mr. Lin and the educators at the middle school. I noticed a lot of priorities in our top tier supports that support elementary school, but this is something that actually supports the education of our students and being able to provide curriculum in a better way at the middle school. I also wonder how many literacy specialists we currently have.
Good questions. So is I really, you know how you look at this stuff over and over and over again.
I do.
Now I'm
A
looking at
round
it again
number
with a
would
little bit of
suffice for
fresh
me right
eyes.
now.
No, just to say that you know I am very hopeful and I you know and I didn't want to answer Dr. Matthews' question this way, but I know think I know where some of his question was going. But if there were to be funds that became available, from our perspective, the McCall schedule implementation is a key priority. We, Dr. Ellen Emma, along with staff, have spent a lot of time really looking at the schedule. Where the 2.0 is really a placeholder. It could be 1.0. It could be some combination of. But there is a need in our view, and I think there's really consensus among middle school staff, and I bet probably also students, that there needs to be some kind of schedule change. The impact of sharing staff at Bacall with other schools really is what's represented in that those FTEs. It's the sharing of staff that really binds the schedule and prevents us from doing things that I think would be more in the best interest of students and staff. The next one, I would say, in hindsight or upon reflection in this very moment, I would likely move the mathematics interventionists up beyond the literacy specialists. We do have a healthy, I'll say healthy. We have good support with our literacy specialists, but Ms. Kirby has been working with them all year, along with the elementary principals and really with the whole process of with the CES of thinking about those roles and really trying to figure out how do we best support literacy in students and staff with the staffing that we have, which I do think that we'll see the ability to do that even as we go through next year, just in having the pilot programming. And one of the things that we've talked about is it's hard to have a really full-fledged tier level support without first also having the program that you're focusing that support around. So I would say probably if I were to just reconfigure this right now, I would put the math specialist above the literacy specialist with them to follow. And then, as I said earlier, the rest of that list from the I can't see the line, but I think it's 16, or it's probably not even close to 16. Math resources down could be potentially funded with outside funds and not operational dollars.
Thank you. I think that's where my thinking was as well, is that currently I don't believe we have any math interventionalists at the elementary level at all. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the effort here would be to 2.5 would allow us to have a 0.5, as the note says, in each school. If you were to look down, and I'm not asking Mr. Mayor to scroll down, but you'd see that FY27 would be adding another 2.5 to get to the 1.0 in each school.
Not to devalue the experience or expertise of our literacy specialists, but to your point, Dr. Hackett, I think as we implement new programs and we are able to provide that literacy professional development, even to our literacy specialists, I think we can reutilize the staff that we have in that area and maximize their skills and experience to help our students. But, you know, as an elementary educator, not having math interventionalists at the elementary level, I see as a primary concern, because we build foundational skills in mathematics the way we do in literacy. And so I would want to make sure that we are able to prioritize that. Were we able to find funding for some of the other things that fall in your top tier, and as well as continue the work of the McCall implementation, because like I had mentioned briefly earlier, I would like to be able to see that the money we invest in our schools be K-12 as well. And there's been a lot of work that has gone into that this year, and I don't want it to be I don't want to slow their work or slow their efforts, or not validate the work that they have done to really make that more effective for our middle school students either. And with that, I will just stop, also knowing that we're on a time limit.
I'm just going to pipe up because I had not spoken yet either. I'm also generally in support of Dr. Hackett's Tier 1 recommendations for $455,000 for literacy, because that has definitely been a focus of our attention and the community's attention for quite some time. And then moving beyond that, I guess I would piggyback on Ms. Bergstrom's comments about and other committee members' comments on the Tier 2 recommendations as well. And I'm glad that Dr. Hackett was able to provide some context for those recommendations. We have been hearing about the McCall schedule the McCall schedule work that's been done by Dr. Ellen Emma, and we have heard from our math teachers about their needs. And I'm glad to see that some of the needs around special education and out-of-district coordinator have already been moved into our level services budget, because those are other needs that we've heard. And Dr. Matthews, I believe, had referred to one of our January meetings where we did have Ms. Isalgas and Mr. Campbell come and speak very eloquently about their needs in those respective areas. So I also hope that we can come to a decision on our Tier 1 item, on our Tier 1 on the Tier 1 recommendations from Dr. Hackett, and then also take up more conversation perhaps around the Tier 2 items. With that, Mr. Nixon?
So I just wanted to offer, I want to get back to the question Dr. Matthews posed, and just a minor correction on semantics. So when he was talking, he talked about what we choose to fund and what we choose not to fund. So just to be clear, at the end of the day, we're making a recommendation, right? So it's town meeting, and of course FinCom makes the recommendation, and sometimes we're aligned, sometimes we're not, but it'll be town meeting that really chooses to fund in an up or down vote. But with respect to incremental increases in the impact that it has, if my back of napkin math is right, if we were to add, just pick either line item or line 8, if we were to add 162,480 to a vote tonight, I believe we'd still be at around 15.1 and something on reserves, but of course that's still incrementally less. And in case there are any FinCom members watching tonight whose heads are exploding, I'd be remiss if I didn't also say that, you know, Moody's has become more explicit. For years, they've said to us all the good things about Winchester, but every year they also say, you know, your operating reserves are lower than your peer communities. So that's been consistent. This round, they've also said, you know, if you're below 20% on a continuing basis, that might be cause for reevaluation. I don't see that as a red flag that we're going to get downgraded, you know, immediately. They just reevaluated us, as we all know, just last year. But I think that just speaks to the need for some 3 and 5 year fiscal planning. And I think Moody's gives us enough rope to do that. But what I might suggest as a compromise to Dr. Matthews's question to us is if my math's right, again, back a napkin, our budget's not going to be voted for either 42 or 47 days from now. And there is still a lot of work yet to do. I spoke earlier to the many tremendous costs that Ms. Rudolph is having to deal with on her side, and she's working hard to bring those into line. I see value in us as a committee, even if we're voting on the 455 edition tonight, to keep some conversation going so that if the trend is positive with respect to the overall municipal budget and the pressures are not so great, we may find ourselves in a position where we might make yet another suggestion for a modification to the budget. That may sound peculiar to some people watching tonight, but as veteran members know, we have traditionally voted a budget in January and it does get tweaked. There's always kind of that last minute negotiation. And in some instances we've even had some town meetings where we had 2 yellow sheets an hour before town meeting opened up. That's not ideal, but that's happened before. So I think it's a good conversation to continue to have in case there's an opportunity to add something yet again to the budget. But just based on where I think we are now, given the town manager's report, I'd be comfortable with the 455.
Thank you. Dr. Matthews?
So I mean, I don't want to get into a granular discussion of Moody's, but I genuinely think that we need to, as a town, re-examine some of our assumptions around that. I know that there are only now 14 communities exclusive of Boston and Cambridge that still have the Moody's AAA rating. I've gone out and looked at some of them, and in one community, they very recently were told the same 15 to 20% for Moody's. And their select board decided to raise their reserve policy from 4 to 8% and said, if you can't, the response from their select board was, if you can't trust that, with the ever dwindling number of communities that we're engaging in responsible financial and fiscal management, you're probably going to be left with 0 AAA communities in Massachusetts at some point. And they just decided to hold it at 8%. So I don't share that concern. I know there are others in town who would disagree with me, but I just wanted to say that since Mr. Nixon's brought up Moody's twice. I personally, I've been doing a little bit of back of the envelope math myself. I would personally like for us to go above and beyond the 455 tonight. Mindful of all the pressures, but I think also there are folks in the community who are really relying on us to try to bolster some of the academic support resources that are in the elementary schools. And I agree with Ms. Bergstrom around the math interventionist. To me, that actually sticks out. It happens to be line item 9 here, but that really sticks out as Dr. Hackett said, as something that should potentially be line item number 8, right under the call schedule implementation. So I would ask, in the interest of time, since we're getting very close to our hard stop, whether there's support for either adding in one of line 7 and 8 to the tier 1 number. So that would take us from 455 to, let me see if I actually have this. I did not do that number. I personally was going to advocate and ask whether folks had any interest in considering 6 plus 7 plus 8, which would get us to 820,580, or I guess as an alternate plan, putting in one of those 2 items, because I know that there are efficiencies to be found. I know that there are outside resources that may come to bear, but I also want to make sure that we acknowledge that I think, at least from our presentation from our elementary math staff, to me, giving those resources and acknowledging that they have benefits across the elementary classroom, at least as a starting point, is really important for me. So just sort of testing the waters to see if anyone would have there would be any support on the committee for that.
Dr.
Yes.
Hackett, could you just clarify, had you said that for either the McCall schedule implementation or the interventionists that oh wait, I guess you said that it was assuming 0.5 FTEs at each school, and then in the out years, there was further funding.
So if you're going to go down the path of adding, I would say that it really doesn't do us any good to have one FTE math interventionist. We would need to have 2 to be able to do anything with any kind of level of credibility or impact. But potentially, and again, like I said, in the recall schedule implementation, we just don't have a firm number on that. 1 FTE might do it. We're carrying 2 right now, but just so you don't go down the path of saying 1 math interventionist, we would need to have 2. It's useless without 2. So just for your consideration, if you're going to continue to go along that line of thinking.
And I didn't mean 1, I meant funding that line.
No, I know. I just wanted to be clear. I just clarifying for probably for myself. I knew what you meant.
And for me. Thank you. All right, Mr. Hopcroft.
Thank you. So, first, I'd like to ask that when we get to 2 minutes before the first committee member has to leave, that we take a vote on the 455, and then since we have a quorum still, the rest of us could keep talking, but just to make sure we have that unanimous if we could. Um, I was intrigued by Mr. Nixon's comment that adding one of the 162s would still keep us in that 15% or 15 range. And so I park that, and then I look at the fact that, um, and my question, I guess, Dr. Hackett, for you is, um, what's your level of confidence that from your conversations with outside funding sources that there might actually be this $250,000 available? Because if it's greater than, say, 50%, I might recommend that, per Mr. Nixon's back of the envelope math, we include the call schedule implementation to FTEs. And then I recall when Ms. Bergstrom had asked, you had bumped the mathematics interventionists up above the literacy specialists. They're about 200. If we think that we might bring in 250,000, it sounds like my back of the envelope calculation is that we might still be around that number Mr. Nixon was talking about, maybe slightly less. And that would get at least a meaningful portion of the tier 2 resources into tier 1.
Stop, Crop. There's a reason why I don't gamble. Go to the casino, play the lottery. I wouldn't really be comfortable saying what my level of confidence is in outside funding at this point, because we have not aggressively pursued anything. So that
All
is
right.
information that I would feel comfortable answering, within another couple of weeks or so. And even within a month or so, I think we'd have a better understanding of exactly what the McCall schedule implementation might require from us. I just, I think that we're probably a month away from really being able to answer those questions with any level of
Okay, fair enough.
confidence.
So I would still like to suggest that we take line 7 and line 9 and include those in the original, with the idea that, you know, no, we can't obviously bank on money at the casino, but that if we needed to, we could make an adjustment downward later. I would rather come out with uh, covering as much of what we really believe is necessary. And if the town finances are going sideways, that we come back and reduce it. I think it'll be a lot harder to come back and say, oh, town finances are going, in positive direction, given where they are right now. They might get slightly better, but I think it'll be hard to come back and say, oh, yeah, we think actually, having that McCall schedule resource, I just don't see how we could add that in. I feel like this is the opportunity now to put stuff in, and if we need to, we can pull it out. But I'm hoping that some community organizations or other sources materialize, and we feel comfortable keeping it in.
Thank you, Ms. Bergstrom.
I'd like to suggest that Dr. Hackett, can somebody scroll down on the spreadsheet for me for a minute so we can see all, sorry, other way. I guess up. Sorry, apologies. I know that for line 2, literacy professional development, that there's currently a warrant article sitting out there. So when we talk about outside resources, we already know that there is $100,000 being put on the warrant by the select board for literacy professional development, which I 100% would support this school committee also either jointly supporting or co-sponsoring or supporting, because as Dr. Hackett said, this is a one-time expense and it would be able to sit outside our budget in that way, which would allow us to move the majority of the McCall schedule implementation into our tier 1 budget if we are able to support that and knowing that it's already on the warrant. For the things in tier 2, I would suggest that I think I've heard from the committee that the math interventionist is a priority and that we move that up and begin to prioritize our tier 2. And if we're able to receive outside funding for the literacy program of pilot through other partner organizations in the community, knowing that we need to offset it by about $200,000, that we would then have that as an immediate tier 2 priority that we could move into tier 1 when we're able to secure that funding. Given that Mr. Hopcroft and I are budget subcommittee, and we're going to need to bring this to the finance committee for support in the next week, I think that coming collaboratively and understanding that we are looking for partner grants and funding to support these one-time costs, while also prioritizing our needs that are going to be year over year, like math interventionalists, I think would be able to demonstrate that we are prioritizing our needs while at the same time we are working with the town and town committees and the town manager in this fiscal year to bring a budget that is going to be reasonable and manageable, and knowing that we have this 2030 plan that we have looked at to develop in the future. I will remind everyone that when we looked at these priorities with the staff and with the community, this wasn't FY26 priorities that we even asked the community to identify or staff to identify. It was priorities over the next 3 to 5 years. So I think that everyone understands that we're not going to get it all in 1 year. And this is a big ask. It really is. I think it's the largest budget increase that this committee has brought to finance committee in the town in the 8 years that I've been on school committee. And I'm cognizant of that. And I want to be able to get everything we need and provide excellent schools. And like I said, as a classroom educator, I would take math interventionalists tomorrow. But I just want to be cognizant of our part in this budget as well.
Sorry, I was muted. Mr.
I was
Nixon.
going to say, Ms.
So
Bolognese.
I hope Mr. Marin is feverishly working his calculator, because I'm always uncomfortable if I'm the only one crunching numbers. But just for the record, if we were to act on a motion to include one McCall schedule implementation at 162,480, as well as line item 9, that's a further add of 365,580 for a budget of 70,870,700 and change, and that would be a 7.14% increase. I just want everybody to understand what that means. I personally, I'm not comfortable crossing into the sevens. Even though something close to the sevens would still be historically high. I agree with everything Ms. Bergstrom just said. Can I just get a clarification though? I was not aware the select board had voted to put an article on the warrant for supplemental funding for the school budget. Did that happen?
I thought,
There is a warrant article on, there is a warrant that has been put forward by a select board member. So it doesn't need the full vote of the select board to be on the warrant for
Okay, I'm just
$100,000
clarifying because
professional
I believe you said the select board was putting an article on, so that was not my understanding. So if
Sorry, I
it's
misspoke,
okay,
Mr.
okay.
yeah,
Nixon.
that
So
wasn't my understanding either.
that is something obviously we will have to talk about at some point because we'll be asked for our opinion. And I have lots of thoughts about that. And I'm right now taking a dim view of it for a number of reasons. So I don't know that I want to bank on that as a strategy, but I know we're short on time. But if Mr. Marin can give me a thumbs up, but I think we're looking at a 7.14% increase if we add those two line items.
715.
Well, see, there you go. That's why you get paid the big bucks.
Thank you.
Do we have any further comment? For me, I guess I would just say, oh, I see Mr. Hopcroft has his hand raised. But I guess I would say I do tend to think I'm very much in favor of the 455,000 for the tier 1. Probably already said that. And well, that may come down at some point depending on potential outside funding. I guess I think that will not, as it sounds from Dr. Hackett, that will not be clear, at least going out a month. And then I think with what Mr. Hopcroft was saying about having items in this recommended budget, at least now, I think that is important because I think coming down the road, I think it would be very difficult to add anything else into that budget. So if we perceive a need for the McCall schedule implementation that Dr. Alanema has been working on and that others have referred to tonight, or the mathematics interventionist, which is that our educators have also expressed a need for that, then I think that we need to include that in this recommendation and see how things develop or unfold over the following month. Mr. Hopcroft.
Thank you. I was just going to ask, since I know Mr. Nixon's concerned with going over 7%, if Mr. Marin might be able to calculate, or Mr. Nixon maybe has already done so, what percent we would be at if you added just the McCall schedule implementation or just the mathematics interventionalists, and uh, um, if one of those rules or the other would be under the 7%, if that would make you more comfortable, Mr. Nixon, just in the interest of time.
I haven't done it, but I presume we're going to be under 7, but we'll see.
Dr. Hacking, can I also ask, could we get away with adding just $100,000 for the McCall schedule implementation? Or do you feel like this is an area we really need the 2.0 complete FTE to be able to accomplish?
So if I could go out on a limb and make a recommendation, having heard the discussion, would there be appetite to, along the line of your question, Ms. Bergstrom, to select a one FTE at this point to include and have it be undesignated, with the idea that when we have more information about what might be available for outside fundings for some of the items that are in the first tier, you have voted a number that would allow us to at least do what likely more than one FTE. If we were in the situation, we would be able to do that. If the interest is in voting the number tonight and not revisiting the discussion, then that would be helpful. I do feel as though you still have time, and I know it's important to vote a number tonight, but I don't see a scenario where you might not be coming back to have another discussion around the budget when we have more information, including outside funding sources. But to your question specifically, it's hard to say. I don't know if Dr. Alanema wants to weigh in at all, and I don't want to put her on the spot because there's just so much work going on around this. But whether one FTE would cover the needs to make the schedule changes the staff is looking at.
Happy to jump in. I think one would unlikely be enough. It might not need to be a full 2.0. But I will also just share, sorry if this point's been raised, I don't think I heard it, that the additional staffing at McCall to make a different schedule work would also benefit the other schools in the district, because the shared staffing that happens between McCall that we'd be, working to eliminate that need for sharing, so that their schedule could move, that would also benefit then the other schools in the district, because the staff would be able to be in other buildings that is currently shared.
Any further questions from committee members?
Does Mr. Marin have a number for us by chance? I'm crunching them now.
And Dr. Hackett, is a one point, like what is a 1.0 FTE? What are we adding?
We basically
Is it
carry
the 800,000?
about 85,000 for one FTE,
Okay.
close to a master's 7.
And when you say that it is an undesignated FTE, I guess what?
Could be used
Sorry,
for math
what does that mean?
interventionalists, could be used for McCall. Correct.
I'm
Correct.
getting an
I
increase.
just wanted to clarify.
I'm getting, if we just picked up the line 7, McCall at 162,480, that's an increase of 6.83%.
Would you be comfortable with that, Mr. Nixon?
I would be, and I'd be willing to make a motion.
Oh, one moment. I just confirm here.
Number
And
crunchers crunching.
I'm sorry, are we saying that this is for the if we were doing the 162,480, is that saying that one of those FTEs is undesignated? Or is that just saying that both?
Just forget what I
FTEs
said about undesignated now.
Okay.
Mr. Nixon suggesting the 162,480 to cover a McCall implementation at 2.0 FTE, if that's, I'm hearing you right, Mr. Nixon.
And while Mr. Marin crunches those numbers, Mr. Nixon, I think I'd be comfortable with that motion as long as we prioritize math interventionalists and try and, as a committee, continue to work with partners through different funding sources through now and town meeting to include that in our base budget. I guess I'm not as pessimistic as other school committee members. I have seen our budget add things between now and town meeting based on information that comes to us from the state about Chapter 70 funding, about information that comes to us about circuit breaker funding, about information that comes to us about from partners with nonprofit organizations and grants. So I think what's important is that this committee prioritizes what comes next if we're able to do that.
Yeah,
So
I like
can
to
we
think
go
about
back
myself
to
as,
Dr.
as,
Can we
as
go back to
prudent.
Dr. Hackett's grid real quick? Because I just wanted to process what Ms. Bergstrom said. So forgive me, Mr. Hopcroft. So are you saying, Michelle, you'd be supportive of the addition of the 162,480, which is 2 FTEs, but not tied to that line item exclusively, but rather 2 FTEs to support math intervention and McCall schedule implementation, and leave it as loose as that for the district to sort of assign and implement? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Is that what you were saying?
It's not. I would be comfortable with that as well. I'm saying if we're adding the 162 tonight to our bottom line ask, I would want to also include something in our motion that says the next priority would be, were we able to find the room to fund anything in the top line through outside sources?
So I
And-
guess
and
I just want to ask,
Yeah, Dr. Matthews.
where is the discussion? Personally, if I were going to make a motion, and I this is hard, right? Because it's open meeting and we're doing this on the fly. But if I were going to make a motion, I would actually make a motion to add 820,580, which would be line items 7 and 9. And I don't, Mr. Nixon, share your discomfort with the 7% number. I mean, I think when I ran for school committee, what I will say is, that we knew there were significant challenges, and we need to address those, for better or worse, with the percentage of our budget that's human resources. We need to address those, shortcomings through budget. And I understand that there is a somewhat challenging picture for the town this particular year, but I guess I am wondering, sort of, these are all needs that have been identified as things that we need, yesterday, let alone next fiscal year, the fiscal year afterwards. We've heard that pretty clearly from our educators. And I guess my inclination is always just to be sort of hopeful and go to town meeting and say, here's what we've learned, and here's what we've heard from our educators. This is our highest priority list. I mean, we can pull that list up again, and there's, I don't know, another 50 items below there that we haven't even looked at today.
So Dr. Matthews, I would only respectfully say that when you ran for school committee, we were not in the middle of collective bargaining. So unless you know where we're going to wind up, because I don't, that adds to my discomfiture. That you're not seeing that here. And there's a process that has to run its course. If we were in like year 2 or 3 of a 3-year agreement, I would be much more inclined to be right there with you. So ideologically,
Agree,
we're
Mr.
not that
Nixon.
far apart. This is the pragmatist in me, knowing that we're in the midst of collective bargaining and the stakes involved.
Mr. Hopcroft.
So I think that's a good point to raise, Mr. Nixon. I do think, as I think Ms. Bergstrom noted, we can, always add or remove items as we get closer to town meeting. And so I know there's ambiguity there, and maybe collective bargaining comes in higher than we expect. In which case, maybe we take another look at this and we say, we can't fit all that in there. So I'm less concerned about that ambiguity right now because I know we still have an opportunity to make adjustments in the weeks and days left before town meeting.
I agree with Mr. Hopcroft. And Mr. Matthews, my heart absolutely 100% agrees with you. But I realize that this does not have to be our final budget, but we have brought a budget that we voted on January 30th. That was our level services budget to the town manager and town meeting. I mean, in FinCom. That was, if we add both of these things in, $800,000 lower than this. And while that may sound like small money in a $70 million budget, I realize that a lot of these items that we want to add right now are year-over-year additions as well. It's not that we're just asking for FTE for FY26, but it's FTE we want to not have to reevaluate in FY27 or FY28. So I want to make sure that we are also sustainable as a district. And given the ambiguity that Mr. Nixon spoke about, were we to be then, which is why I would like to see us prioritize those tier 2 additions. Whether we add any of them to the base budget or not, I think it's important for this committee to signal that these are 100% things that teachers need, that students need, and that the community has also recognized as a need. So we haven't even talked about the theater program review, which I think we have heard from many community members is a priority. It's only a $20,000 addition. But all of the things under item 6 are 100% priorities for us.
So
So
I
that's
guess
where
my question is then why don't we just add in all the things under tier 2? I mean,
why don't we add under the things underlying 12?
Well, Ms.
I
Bergstrom,
mean,
you don't need to
where
be,
do
I
we
mean,
stop?
that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I think the community has called on us to do something. I mean, I would argue that we need more literacy specialists. I think it's a priority for a lot of folks we've heard from, including in the literacy report this year. I mean, this committee, I think historically has done a really effective job in some cases of negotiating against itself. And I think what we need to really ask town meeting is, what is the level of support around these things? We believe, at least I believe, I'm only going to use an I statement and speak for myself. I believe that Dr. Hackett would not have prioritized these. I mean, whoever's controlling the screen, if you could scroll down, I think it's a really important thing to see how many more things are down there, all of which are highly needed, right? We have one of the lowest per pupil expenditures in the state. And I think the past year in the literacy report has taught us just how precarious our position is in terms of maintaining educational excellence. These are not not needed asks. These are not things that are really optional. And I think we're negotiating against ourselves if we don't acknowledge that, we're not, I genuinely do not believe we're going to have an opportunity to go and ask town meeting for more. And I think there are things on this tier 2 list that need to get in flight and not wait another year and a half for them. And I know it's an uncomfortable thing, but if we don't have the conversation with town meeting as part of what we all acknowledge, I think is an upcoming override conversation, I just don't know, how else to address it with the community. And so I'm just going to state for the record, I support all of the things that are currently on the screen being added for fiscal year 26. And I support going, as Mr. Nixon said earlier, to the members of town meeting and asking them whether there's support for that, because we know they're needed. Ms. Bergstrom, you say your heart is in it. Well, then why don't we go and ask, right? It doesn't mean that they don't potentially say no, but why wouldn't we ask for the things we know we need, we know our educators need, we know our students need? I don't know how to say that any more clearly.
And I would just also comment that I think Dr. Hackett and Mr. Marin and our administrators have been very careful in thinking over the course of this process that we need to be thinking over the 5 years. And they've been planning very carefully over the 5-year. And Mr. Marin scrolled down the screen, and I think anybody on WinCam or in the audience right now can see that this list of needs is very long, but it's also been prioritized. So we can see that there are needs coming up in FY 27, 28, FY 29. This is being thought through very carefully. It's not as if we're coming back with all of these needs in this one year or in this particular year. And I do think Dr. Hackett has already mentioned that, or has said, I guess I personally feel Dr. Hackett has said that of these tier 2 priorities, he is in favor, or not in favor, he would recommend the McCall schedule implementation and the math interventionists. And so I guess I would still be in support of the adding in the 800, those two items for the $820,580. And I guess to Dr. Matthews' point, we have heard historically from Dr. Hackett in in our meetings and from our educators and from Dr. Elenema that there is a certain reticence in asking for what we need. And that has been a pattern. And I guess I am also of the mind that if there is the opportunity at this point to be able to ask, then maybe we see. So, Mr. Hopcroft. And
thank
just by
you.
the way, it's 6.
Okay. I'm not one of the people who has to get off right away. So if whoever needs to leave, and I'm sorry that you're missing whatever it is that you're supposed to be at, but give us like 2 minutes to vote before you leave if that happens. So I agree with a lot of the sentiments here. First of all, I want to make the point that when I was saying that about ambiguity with teacher contracts and stuff, my point was that we could lean in and actually do more stuff. And if they come in really high, it would be easy to remove it. I still think it's hard to add stuff at the last minute. And I'm just trying to be a realist there. I would support, I like Dr. Matthews' suggestion of throwing everything in. I'm concerned that that may be a lot, but I do think, including the line 7 McCall schedule implementation and line 9 mathematics interventionalists. I'd like to add more, but I feel like it's not unreasonable, and those are areas that we heard either high need internally, and there's some great efficiencies and strategic changes that can happen within McCall, and we've heard a lot from the community. I'd like to include those now, understanding that it goes a little bit above Mr. Nixon's comfort level, and then we'll continue having these conversations, and as Dr. Hackett said, we'll find there'll be more information coming that may cause us to revisit other things within the budget, and if we feel that we were overly aggressive and it doesn't make sense, we can always pull one of them out, but I do feel like it's worth putting in there and making the statement that these are the things, the recommendations of what we really need to run an excellent district, and so I'd be inclined to put them in even if it's a slight overreach, and if in the weeks leading up to town meeting the facts and circumstances make that more clear, we can revisit it. But if we don't do something now, I'm really skeptical that it will ever happen.
Ms. Bergstrom?
So given that Mr. Hopcroft and I are the budget subcommittee chairs, I'm curious when we go to speak to FinCom about an $800,000 potential increase to our budget over our level services budget, and we are asked what in our budget we feel like we can cut. What would this committee say to that? Nothing?
Nothing. I mean, I can.
I'm genuinely asking the question, Mr. Matthews, as your representative.
But the analogy I've used in the past is, it feels like we're a skeleton. The district is a skeleton, and we have not even enough tendons and ligaments for all of the joints to move. And so we're at a position right now where we're basically saying, oh, wait, the arm needs to flex right now. So we're going to take that tendon that was on the knee before and put it on the arm so that it can flex. And then we'll put it back on the knee when we need it the next time. I mean, it genuinely feels like that's where we're at, right? And I think that's the clear message we got from the CES report. So yeah, I guess, I mean,
It
it's a
is,
hard,
but the
it's a
message
hard
I'm getting from other
conversation.
town committees, Mr. Matthews, is that our level services budget is too high. So
I mean,
I'm
I think that
genuinely curious.
I think that when you have a situation where we live in a commonwealth where we have a Proposition 2.5 limit on, you know, without going to the voters and asking them, right, for taxes, has gotten us in the past 5 years, 5 fiscal years, has gotten us approximately an additional 13% in revenue. While if you actually look at national statistics, municipal inflation has been running roughly in those same 5 years at a rate of between 25 and 26%. I mean, I think we're actually, as a town, we're in a really very enviable financial position that we've got this giant pile of free cash, which is, you can call it a rainy day fund, you can call it whatever, right? But like, this is, you know, I mean, this is rubber to road time, right? The ESSER funds are gone, the ARPA funds are gone, there's no more assistance, right? And I think as a town, we need to make a decision. I think we need to ask town meeting, you know, what is it that we want to commit to? Do we want to commit to continued excellence in education and, you know, facing up to the reality of 26% 5-year inflation, right? And go back to the voters for an override. But in the meantime, I think we need to assume good intent and assume that that's, you know, this is a community that supports education. And I think we need to just we need to see if people support that. If they don't, then we have an entirely different conversation to have, you know, in the next 2 fiscal years. But
But understanding, Mr. Matthews, that free cash is one-time funding. And a lot of the things that we're looking to add are year-over-year FTE. So we are not looking at just drawing down on free cash to fund this budget. We are looking at drawing down on free cash year after year after year to fund the budget that we're proposing tonight. If we were looking at an override in FY26, I would make this list even longer. 100%. I guess my concern is I don't want to commit to educators, our community, and our kids with FTE that we won't be able to fund in FY27 because we have drawn down on free cash, and we may not be the only board looking at that free cash bucket as well, and we don't control it entirely amongst ourselves.
did you say we're not looking? I just want to be clear. Did you say we're not looking at an over? I mean, because I believe that the state of the town committee. I
No,
mean,
this year for this
okay,
budget, Mr.
right.
Matthew.
Yeah, okay.
For this budget, like I said, if we had an override vote on the ballot this budget, 100%, like there would be more FTE in this, and we would have an articulated plan around that. I guess my concern is you keep talking about the free cash that we have to draw down on, but much of what we're looking at is adding FTE, and I don't want to add the worst thing we can possibly do for educators. And in a year when we have a contract negotiation, is to give them support, give them FTE, and then tell them in FY27 that we have to take it away. And I guess that is always in the back of my mind. I do not want to raise class size limits. I do not want to have to fire educators the year after we hire them.
And I guess I would just say that I think that there are hard conversations that have to be had. And Dr. Matthews has alluded to those. And I do think we'd have to, if we're asked about that, then I think that we'd have to look at the budget and say that, of course, there are needs that have been expressed by the community, by our faculty, and that we have been planning for over the 5 years. And also with respect to an override, yes, it's not this year, but I believe that this is something that is that this conversation will be had as a town, looking towards next year. And I think that the planning is in place at the moment, to be able to articulate what our needs will be going down the road. So I think there
And
would
then
be
we
some
have
hard
to pass that
conversations that
override, Ms.
would have to
Bolognese.
be had. Mhm. Yes, I agree. And that's where a long runway comes in and a lot of planning. And I think that this list, and this discussion, I think it's a great discussion this evening, lays the groundwork for where we're going to need to go with planning for an override. Mr. Hopcroft.
So I do have something to say. Dr. Hackett, did you have a clarification?
Oh, yes,
Or
Dr. Hackett popped up his hand.
No, first of all, I just want to say this. What you're grappling with tonight in the discussion you're having is exactly the discussion you're having, exactly what you should be grappling with. So you are doing a great job trying to manage through some difficult conversations. All I want really to add to that is that if we do not get an override going into FY27, the scale of reductions that we're talking about is going to dwarf everything that you're looking at tonight. So when we're talking about if we're worried about, and I understand, and you can see my top tier recommendations had no FTEs, but if the worry is that we're going to have to cut positions that we just employed because we don't get an override, I'm going to tell you that list is going to look longer than what I have here for the next 3 fiscal years in terms of the number of reductions that we're going to have to make, because we are now really if we're done free cash, and if, for example, we were to have to come in at 3% this year, we're talking about a reduction of over $2 million. It would be devastating to the school system. We do not have, regardless of what some might think, we do not have that kind of overhead. Nary a central office educator, administrator on this list, right? All of this is teaching and learning. We're not asking for any additional central office staff. We're not asking for anything that isn't directly connected to the classroom. So we are at a level right now that if we do not get an override for FY27, the reductions are going to be much more than this. So I would just say that if that is the concern, it maybe it shouldn't have the weight that even I gave it, and listening to this conversation, because we really are going to be much further beyond the reductions of just these positions that we're talking about as part of tier 2.
so
Thank you. Mr. Nixon?
I wanted,
Or
I
Mr.
wanted,
I-
oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Hopcroft, did you want to just finish the thought?
yeah, I actually never gave my thought. Zoom took my hand down when I asked
Oh, that's
Dr.
right.
Hackett
I'm
if he
sorry.
wanted to
That
say
is
something.
right.
But I'll be quick though. I just wanted to reflect that I heard from this committee consensus around the level services budget and around the 455 for the literacy ad. And so really, I feel like we're just talking about these two, line 7 and line 9, which, I feel like when I look at them, they just seem significant. That the return on the investment of this 365,000 in our 70+ million dollar budget is meaningful. And so I guess that's why I wanted to lean in on that we're not revisiting the whole thing. We're not, I mean, we're gonna have to talk to FinCom about, everything that we have consensus on already. It's really, and I think we might even have consensus on line 7. And so really, from my point of view, I think we're talking about adding line 9. I know Dr. Matthews is perhaps talking about adding a few other things as well, but just, I don't think it's as,
To be clear, I'm saying line 7 and 9.
sorry, yeah, line 7 and 9 are the two that I think are at discussion now. Because I think I've heard consensus on the tier 1 and everything prior to that. So anyway, I think they're meaningful items that deliver a good return on investment for what we're doing. And frankly, future years, we're talking about building up the mathematics interventionalists, which, so there are investments over time, but anyway, we'll sit there. So thank you, Mr. Nixon, for that.
So I just wanted to offer, I thought the conversation we had at the school committee table with our math team was outstanding. And I'm glad that they let me ask what I thought were some dumb questions, maybe turned out not to be dumb, or maybe they were humoring me. But questions like, it's so striking to me that 50% of our elementary teachers are using everyday math and 50% aren't. And it's a spiraling curriculum. What does that mean for our elementary kids? So, right, remember, my number one concern is that doing harm somehow? And the answer was no, but there is recognition that because when you've got those are gaps, right? So for some kids, they're on that continuous spiral. And for some, it's periodic, and some see it rarely. That concerns me, but my takeaway from that conversation was the team needed to continue to talk and do more work. And I I was heartened because I feel like we've got smart people that are thinking about this and asking all the right questions, but I'm not sure. I didn't come away with an understanding we were as prepared to make an investment in mathematics like we are around literacy, but I have every expectation something's coming. And I want those conversations to continue. The other thing I just wanted to say is everything that's on this list, this is perfect to help sort of support that override conversation. And many members on this committee will recall, and maybe some folks watching tonight, I know some of you are veteran, you've lived here for a long time, you do remember this, others may not. We pitched two budgets around the last override in 2019. If you remember, we had a recommended budget and then we called it the austerity budget. So we said, well, fair point, Ms. Bergstrom. But what we said was, here's an austerity budget. Like if there's no override, these are the consequences, these are the cuts. But if the override passes, look at what we're going to accomplish, and here's why it's so important. I think this document we're looking at tonight helps build that foundation for the big ask, and I think it's fantastic. And I think many of the comments that Dr. Matthews makes tonight play into that and sort of set the stage for that conversation. Being mindful of time, however, I am going to make a motion. I recommend, I'm going to move that the school committee establish the recommended FY26 district budget of $70,667,618, an increase over FY25 of 6.84%. This is inclusive of recommendations from Dr. Hackett totaling $455,000 as presented, and in addition, $162,480 funding 2 FTEs to support math intervention and/or McCall schedule implementation. That's it. And I would just I appreciate Ms. Bergstrom's comments about sort of emphasis on math. I actually don't disagree with that, but I would simply say it is to address those two because I feel like the administration can kind of figure out how to utilize those 2 FTE. But I want to just go on the record. I support what Ms. Bergstrom said. I just wasn't sure how to actually get that into a motion. So that's my motion.
I second the motion.
And I would
Mr.
just ask
Hopcroft, you
I would
had your
ask,
hand.
if I may, can I ask Dr. Hackett, is my motion clear?
I'm unclear.
I wouldn't
Mr.
mind you
Nixon, can I
clarifying
try?
it. Just, I think I understand it, Mr. Nixon, but I think it would be helpful if you just.
I would
Since I
agree.
seconded, I
am
could
a
try
little
again,
unclear
Mr.
on that.
Nixon.
So
I
Ms.
believe
Berg,
Mr.
let
Nixon
me
is
ask you,
adding
would
two
Ms. Berg,
undesignated FTE to be used either for McCall schedule implementation or math interventionalists as Dr. Hackett sees the greatest priority. And given that if we are able to obtain outside funding, just as an aside for some other items above, it would allow us to prioritize those two things. But as
so if,
Dr. Hackett sees fit. It adds just two undesignated FTE as Dr. Hackett suggested.
That's what I thought I heard. And
that was my intention. And so what I would like, since my motion was seconded, if Ms. Bergstrom's willing to say that that is a motion to amend, I'll second that because it was very, very clear.
Ms. Bergstrom, I think he's asking whether or not you would make a motion, the
I
second.
can make a motion to
as you
amend to
stated.
add two undesignated FTE at $162,480 to the recommended FY26 budget for use for McCall schedule implementation and/or math interventionalists as Dr. Hackett and his staff prioritize.
I'll second that.
I see that we still have some questions, so we will discuss the motion. Mr. Hopcroft.
Yeah, Dr. Hackett, could you just address the suggestion that Mr. Nixon made about the readiness for the mathematics interventionalists? Is that a fair statement that that it would be beneficial to have more time and defer that a year, or are we, if funded, are you ready to go on that now?
So I think I think what I heard Mr. Nixon saying, and I did refer to it when we were talking about the literacy intervention, or actually to the MTSS, certainly having a unified curriculum, unified program helps make intervention easier in that interventionists going in knowing what each teacher is doing. I would suggest to you, having been at other places, and to the extent that that matters anymore, that I've never been anywhere where there have not been math interventionists, regardless of the curriculum of the program. So this is a need, and I think it was said by a couple of you, and I know Dr. Matthews said it, like the stuff that's below this are things that are happening in other school systems that are not as high performing as we are. There's really nothing on this list, not much on this list, if you continue to go down, that we do not see in high performing school systems. So I think teachers are ready for it. I think we heard it through the survey. I think we would make good use of it. I know Ms. Kirby, it would be certainly figuring out what those positions would be doing. And if we hire the right people, certainly it might be a little bit of fire ready aim, but I think that support would be well utilized regardless of where we are. Would it be perhaps more focused and targeted if we were down the path a little bit more with our programmatic curriculum work? Probably, but it's not that I would not say it's not needed. I would say it's overdue.
Can I just
So,
add
I
in the
would-
packet
oh.
that we have a K-5 math director,
Coordinator, correct.
coordinator.
Yep.
So we do have a K-5 math coordinator who could
Absolutely.
supervise math
Right.
interventionalists at this time. And
Correct.
just like the work we're doing with literacy, just because we haven't chosen a new curriculum doesn't mean we don't need to provide support to kids.
Right, because they're foundational literacy skills, math skills, just like they're foundational literacy skills, regardless of the program that you're using. So.
Right.
Yeah, so I guess I would say that I now believe that there's consensus on the committee for the 455 plus the 7. And so now I feel like we're just talking about the mathematics interventionalists, and I feel, be happy to tell FinCom if they asked, that I thought that was, if this was the thing that broke the camel's back, that I just thought it was a really important thing. And anyway, so I'll leave it there.
I want to test support for, I'm just going to propose this potentially. I guess I'm making an amendment to the motion, and I want to test support for this because it's the way we have to do this. And Andrew and Dr. Hackett, if you can, Mr. Marin and Dr. Hackett, if you can be prepared on the numbers of this, because I'm remote right now. I'm not. I'm sitting in a room and I was supposed to be someplace almost half an hour ago. I want to test support for a total addition of 6 plus 7 plus 9, which based on my math would be $820,580. And then I believe, Mr. Marin already had calculated that out. So I would like to make a motion to amend the motion by Mr. Nixon and Ms. Bergstrom to what's currently highlighted.
So if I can, point of order, we are considering an amendment to my motion. That's what we should be voting on, not an amendment to the main motion. So I think we should be debating an amendment to the motion. That's an up or down vote. And then we come back to the main motion. And I think Dr. Matthews is welcome to make an amendment to the main motion if he wishes, but right now we're debating an amendment to the main motion made by Ms. Bergstrom.
Are you following, Mr. Matthews?
I think the important thing is for me to follow.
Well,
So
no,
there
because
is-
he
there
just,
is a-
I didn't want him to feel like Mr. Nixon just sidelined him.
No.
So
No, I just want to make sure I understand the
I don't
motions
want it
within
to
the motions.
become. I don't want it to become a nested loop here. So
That's what I'm worrying about.
There is a motion that's been seconded. That was my main motion. Ms. Bergstrom has
Yes.
made an
Amended.
amendment that has been seconded. So we are debating Ms. Bergstrom's amendment.
Okay.
Can I have a point of order?
Would it be appropriate for a motion to be withdrawn?
That is also one. The motion or the motion to amend?
Could I just ask, procedurally?
And then Mr. Hopcroft, would you like to clarify something?
Yes, thank you. I would like to get to the point where we can address Mr. Matthews, Dr. Matthews' motion. And I'm wondering, is the best way to do that? I don't know if he can make a motion on your original motion and include her motion, or if we just address her motion, I'm happy to vote on her motion, but then hand it back to Dr. Matthews to pick up. Just what's the fastest way to get where we're trying to get to? I just don't know the procedure as well.
This is a little bit of new territory for me.
We take a vote on Ms. Bergstrom's motion to amend unless she wants to withdraw it, and then we simply come back to the main motion.
Okay.
So alternatively, we can discuss the motion and discuss if we need a new motion. So, I would propose, based on what Dr. Matthews said, that I would respond that my concern, Dr. Matthews, is not the total amount, but the total FTE that we're adding to our budget. So it's not the FTE that we're adding in FY26 that would be my concern. It's the cumulative FTE that would be my concern. I'm not concerned as concerned as Mr. Nixon is about going over 7%. My concern is that in the negotiating year, in a year where the federal government is cutting our education funding nationally, in a year where our state budget is going to certainly be uncertain to backfill whatever happens at the federal level, I am really concerned in this fiscal year to add FTE and support for teachers just to pull the rug out from under their feet. So that is my primary concern, is not just Winchester finances, but state finances and federal finances, and our ability to backfill, our ability to provide special education support for our kids moving forward if our special education budget is cut at the national level. I don't think we are in a vacuum right now in our state in the world. And while I really want to be able to respond to the staff, I want to be, like I said, as a classroom educator, I'd take a math interventionist tomorrow, but not to find out that I show up in my classroom, 6 months later and not have that math interventionalist. So
And
my concern is total FTE.
And I guess I am a little concerned. Well, I am concerned about saying that we have 2.0 undesignated FTEs in this motion.
For two purposes,
Because I
Ms.
believe,
Gomez.
pardon me?
It's for
It's
two
not,
purposes.
it's undesignated, but for two purposes only. It is either to address McCall schedule implementation or to provide math interventionalists.
Which is really not the same
Because I
thing as
guess
undesignated, to be fair.
Sticking with my original.
Can I just ask for clarification?
Okay, because sticking with my thought process. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that just sticking with my original understanding of that. And then also with what Dr. Hackett had been saying, that having anything less than 2.0 FTEs for math interventionists would not be particularly meaningful. And correct me if I'm incorrect in that understanding. Then I guess that is a little worrisome to me, because then I feel that as if that just automatically writes off the work that's been done on the McCall schedule implementation and the work of the McCall schedule group from this year. So I guess I do have some concern about that. Mr. Hopcroft, you've had your hand raised.
Thank you.
And then I'll come back to you, Ms. Bergstrom.
Right. Yeah. So I was just, I feel like, I've been on the committee for 4 years, and I feel like in that time, every year there's been a reason not to invest in things, and we squeezed in, a couple tenths of a Mandarin teacher, but for the most part, there's always been a reason not to do it, and I'm not convinced. I understand the uncertainty in the macroeconomic environment and in our local environment, but I do feel like what we're talking about here is 2.5 people, $200,000. And so yeah, the economy may fall off a cliff, the town budget may fall off a cliff. A lot of things could happen. which will have significant implications across the entire, $70 million budget we're talking about here. But we're just talking about $200,000 for 2.5 people. I'm not saying $200,000 is not a lot of money, but it's for, math interventionalists, in each of our buildings, and putting us on a path towards, building more support, like other districts have. And, and so I don't feel that it's, I don't want to diminish all of the external factors out there. They're real, and we may have to deal with them, and hope not, but we may. But I think they're like, a tsunami, and this is like a swimming pool. It's not. I'm not saying it's a bucket. It's a significant investment, but it's it's a significant investment in a in a subject matter that's important and across a lot of our, and it just feels like a very good place to invest $200,000. And um, just in the broader context, it just feels like to me, it feels like a good thing to do.
So I see we still have a few hands raised, and then I just want to clarify if we had a second on Ms. Bergstrom's motion.
We did. I think I seconded it.
Okay. All right, we'll just continue the conversation on this and we'll get through the couple of hands. So Ms. Bergstrom.
No,
Oh,
I thought
okay.
you were calling on me.
Okay, yes, I was calling on you.
And I guess, Mr. Hopcroft, for me, I totally agree with you that $200,000 isn't a lot of money, but I equate money to people in a district. And while I also understand that math interventionalists could actually save us money often in the long term, we could intervene with kids earlier. We could, maybe meet the needs of students and provide some tier 2 support that would be critical for them. It's still people. So when we start talking about FTE, it's not $100,000 in literacy professional development. It's not $300,000 in buying a program. It's 2 people we're talking about. And it's the people that are going to be worked into schedules that are going to be part of a day. And I would rather, since it is only March 20th at this point, I would rather over deliver in May by being able to work those back into our schedule, work those into our budget over time. And perhaps we're voting this budget too early. Perhaps we could come to consensus tonight that as a committee, we support math schedule implementation and math interventionalists and delay the vote on this budget until a later date would be a possibility as well. When we find out about any additional funding for those one-time sources that are in tier 1. Because what I would hate to do is promise our staff that more support is coming and then get to our May town meeting and say, whoops, sorry, we really couldn't deliver that for you. So that's my concern, is that I don't want to signal that we've accomplished something in March for a budget we're putting forward in May and promising something that we may not be able to deliver on. That's my concern.
Can I just say that I think it's actually the opposite message that it sends if we say we think it's really important. We're going to do everything we can to include these in our budget, and we understand we may not be able to get there, and they may come out. And but it's our intention. We think it's that important to have it in there now, and I just don't think we'll add it later, honestly.
I mean, we always
Dr.
do.
Hackett,
Is the
did you
thing.
have a clarifying?
No,
point?
just in terms of like process and how we operate is we wouldn't be posting any or posting and filling any new positions that are subject to town meeting vote prior to having town meeting take action on the budget. So just to make sure everyone understands, like we wouldn't be hiring somebody now and laying them off if it doesn't go through town meeting. And I know that's not all of the point that's being made. The point's being made that if we bring people on and then an override doesn't pass, then we're laying people off that we've hired. I would just simply go back to say that if we don't get an override for FY27, we're going to be cutting a lot of people who already are here, because there's just no way we can continue to not have an adjustment to the overall underlying operation budget long term.
Mr. Nixon?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I appreciate Ms. Bergstrom going kind of macro scale and talking about things that are happening at the federal level, which some of us have been speaking about over the past month. And I think they're very real concerns and I appreciate them. But to whomever maybe was suggesting those are, maybe hard to get our heads around or a little more theoretical, at a very real level, though, we're in the midst of collective bargaining. And so to sort of extend the expression from Ms. Bergstrom's concerned about people that might be hired and our commitment to them. We've got hundreds of people working for us now. And so we are in the midst of collective bargaining. If that weren't the case, if we already had a multi-year successor agreement in hand, I'd be in a slightly different place on this. So, I mean, I came tonight prepared to accept the recommendations of the superintendent. I've listened a lot to what my fellow committee members have been speaking about, and sometimes public service is about compromise, and for a lot of good reasons I'm willing to go above the 455, and that was the basis of the motion.
I would just add, Dr. Matthews has said that he needs to be off this, and so I don't know if you're prepared to take action on this. I know, and I'm not even sure what the motion is anymore.
I'm halfway through the thing I was supposed to start at 5:45. So if I miss, it's.
Well, I guess, are we close to having a vote or not?
Yeah, I would like to be able. I think we have two. I mean, regardless of Robert's rules, I think we have two competing
So there's some
proposals on the
glitching
table.
going on here.
I mean, regardless of the Robert's rules, I hope we can kind of just work our way out of it. We've got sort of, it feels like we've got two competing proposals on the table and we need to vote. So I don't know how we do that, but I will let those who are more expert than I
It would seem that the quickest way to do this would be, because I believe Ms. Bergstrom's amendment has a second. Is that right?
It does have a second.
So perhaps you take a vote on that now and then see where that goes and go from there, or this person
and then we come back to
withdraws withdraws the amendment.
Are we voting on the amendment or on the?
You're voting
it
on
would
the
be
amendment.
on the amendment.
We're voting on the 6.84.
But
Oh, so
specifically Ms. Bergstrom's amendment that clarifies how that extra 180, whatever it is spent. The 162, 180.
And I would just comment, just referring back to Dr. Hackett's comments from earlier, that, well, what it sounded to me as that he was saying was, this is, or I'm trying to think of a good way to say this, that this is just the tip of the iceberg, and that if we do add in the 2 FTEs, and I know I hear the concern from you, Ms. Bergstrom, about you add some people in, and then you might have to then at some point you might have to take them, and then at some point then maybe you come back and you're laying off people. So I hear that. But what I also heard from Dr. Hackett was that if we are not able to achieve as a community an override in this FY27, then this is just the tip of the iceberg. It's not just going to mean 2 FTEs. It's going to mean a lot more people. So I guess that's what I guess that is what I hear. So, but you do have your hand raised, and then I would respectfully ask the committee to call the vote.
Well, I was just going to actually make a different suggestion. It sounds like that there is consensus from the committee that we all prioritize the McCall schedule and the math interventionalist. I would just suggest that we come to consensus that we would like to find a way to make those a part of the budget, and that there's a lot of one-time funding in the top tier. So we could actually just come to consensus on this budget today. It would give us time to get community feedback on those additions and to have a discussion with the finance committee about those additions. And then we have another meeting scheduled on March 27th, and we could vote at that time.
I'm a little bit concerned though, because that's a different committee, and and I know that different committee will revisit this, and will make different recommendations, but I just feel like, um, it doesn't feel substantively terribly different to me to come to consensus or just vote on what we think is right here, where it sounds like we're pretty close. Um, and so I guess my counter suggestion might be, why don't we just vote on this, and then the future committee can decide what adds or subtractions it wants to make in the future based on additional input we get. And
I guess, Mr.
information.
Hopcroft, I was thinking of the fact that one committee doesn't bind the hands of another, and if this committee turns over after March 20th, then this vote is going to be essentially null and void anyway.
Oh, okay, so we're agreeing then we may as well just go forward.
No, I'm saying that it could be an inconsequential vote.
Okay, well then let's move forward with that, uh and then yeah, it'll be inconsequential, and the next committee can decide what to do with it.
Madam Chair, what are we doing?
All right, so we have on the table a motion from an amendment to the motion from an amendment to the motion from Ms. Bergstrom. If you would like to summarize that, just so that we are all clear. And I know we have the second on it as well, but just to make sure that we are all clear. We will start there.
Try. My amendment was to clarify Mr. Nixon's motion. So the amendment would
Yes.
be to add 2.0 FTE to the Tier 1 budget to support either a McCall schedule change or to support elementary math interventionalists as Dr. Hackett sees fit, for a budget of $70,600 and $67,618 for a 6.84% increase over FY25.
And that was a clarifying amendment to my main motion. So I seconded what Michelle put forward.
All right. And we had the second, so we will do a roll call vote, and I will just move across my screen. Ms. Bergstrom,
Aye.
Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
whoops, Mr. Hopcroft,
No.
Dr. Matthews,
No.
and the chair votes no. So the amendment to the motion fails, and we come back to the main motion.
So I guess at this time I will
Which was-
re-offer my amendment, which is to have the budget, the bottom line budget number at $70,870,718, which includes all of the tier one additions, plus an addition for the 2 FTE for the McCall schedule, and an addition of 2.5 FTE for elementary math specialists or interventionists.
No, second that.
Can you go back to the budget, Dr. Hackett?
Well, Mr. Mayor.
So it's what's highlighted in yellow, I believe.
I would offer, if we're going to do that, we add all of Tier 2. That is my amendment. In for a penny, in for a pound. If it's what we need, then we ask for it all. We don't piecemeal any of it.
But again, point of order.
So my motion would be that my motion to move forward would be that we do all of Tier 1 and all of Tier 2 recommendations. While I prioritize McCall schedule implementation and math interventionalists, We need the resources to be able to do that for math. We have added nothing to PD, which the staff also asked for. At K-12, we have only added elementary literacy PD, and we have not done the theater program review, which we have heard loud and clear from the community that even deleting the theater program courses from the high school were not acceptable. So I support Dr. Matthews in asking for what we need. And if we're going to do that, we should ask for all of it, not just part of it.
So again, just point of order. So we have a motion to amend from Dr. Matthews that was seconded by Mr. Hopcroft. So we're debating that motion to amend as
That
presented by
motion.
Dr. Matthews.
Correct.
That's what
And
I was going to say.
I am putting forward
But-
that as part of the discussion around that if we're going to ask for what we need, then we ask for what we need.
Mhm.
Why are we piecemealing any of it?
I think we have the same procedural issue we just had a few minutes ago of a.
We did.
So should we vote on this amendment and then we can see if there's another amendment?
Well, we discuss it and then we vote.
I think
On the
there's discussion first and then come back to that. So the question on the table is, Dr. Matthews has put forth a motion and which has been seconded on including the tier 1 items, 455,000, and items 7 and 9 around McCall schedule implementation and the math interventionist. I can't, I do not have the total handy in front of my eyes.
Yeah, you do.
Thank you, Mr. Maron.
For a 7.15% increase. Thank you very much. And the discussion that we are now we will discuss that motion. And the opening discussion point is, if we are going in for these two items, 7 and 9, around McCall schedule and McCall and math interventionists, then are we interested in pursuing all of the tier 2 line items?
Actually, my
No.
suggestion was a little stronger than that, Miss Bolognese. My suggestion was that this committee has said they don't want to piecemeal the needs of the district, and that we want to ask for what we need, and we need to signal that ask to the community, which I completely agree with. And if we are not going to consider a budget that could be reasonable and fit within our needs and the town's needs, but we want a budget that fits within the district needs, and Dr. Hackett and the community and the educators have come forward with all of tier 1 and tier 2 for FY26, then we shouldn't be piecemealing any of it. We should be asking for exactly what we need, to Dr. Matthews' point. If we start piecemealing just the McCall schedule and the math interventionalists off that list, then other people will begin to delete also. So I would say we ask for all of tier 1 and tier 2 as part of our budget, and really message what we need.
I really need to go, but I just want to respond to the point that I feel like my words are being mischaracterized. I didn't say that. I think, there are different points here where, we have decisions to make. It's not that I don't support everything on that list, right? But it's, I think what I was trying to do is get to a point where we have the most pressing needs that we know of that are there included. And that's,
And literacy specialists aren't?
I think they are, but I'm trying to get to what I believe is a sort of, reasonable compromise position here. But I don't like the mischaracterization of what I was saying, because I wasn't saying, I think absolutely we need all the things on the list, including everything that's way beyond tier 2, right? And on some level, tier 1 and tier 2 are the things that Dr. Hackett brought forward, and I'm just trying to, put something forward that I think gives a little bit more support and accounts for the fact that we're likely to get some outside funding. We're very much hopeful we're going to get some outside funding. And so, I think what I'm trying to put forward is something that is, I think, a reasonable compromise position, not at all saying that there's not more needs that exist way even beyond tier 2.
Mr. Hopcroft, and then I'm going to call the vote so that we can have Dr. Matthews participate.
Yeah. So I concur with Dr. Matthews. I do think it's a bit of a slippery slope here, and I think finding a compromise makes sense, and I don't think it's um, you know the suggestion that we may not care about one thing or another thing. We very carefully, and I think Ms. Bergstrom, you clarified with Dr. Hackett the rank order of importance on these items, and we actually switched the two items such that um, the fall schedule implementation was the next highest priority, and then you switched mathematics and literacy specialists, making mathematics interventionists the next highest priority. So, I think it's a reasonable in between. I would love to support them all, but I think this is a just compromise and whatnot. I think it's a reasonable place to land.
And Ms. Bolognese, I'm not prepared to vote yet. I would just like to add that literacy specialists are one of the things we're crossing off the list as we're willing to compromise on. And I think our last couple years have spoken loud and clear that literacy specialists and support are a primary need of our educators and our staff. Professional development is only at $50,000. And our staff has spoken loud and clear about the need for outside professional development and more professional development. What we are talking about now I'm hearing reasonable compromise and not asking for what we need. What we need above the ask that we just made a motion on is, can Mr. Marin do that for me? I see $75,000, $250,000 more over. And we just talked about $200,000, Mr. Hopcroft, not being a big ask.
I'm
So
supportive of doing. If you want to go all in, I'm supportive of that. I do think these are
I
priorities.
say we go all in. Ask
Yeah,
for what we need.
yeah, that's back to Dr. Matthews' original point, I think.
That is what I was trying to say. Yes, thank you.
All
If
right.
any one of you are looking for my advice on this, or my opinion,
Please.
Can I ask you a specific question as part of you sharing your opinion? Is how many literacy specialists do we have already, right? So that's just to sort of reveal where my thinking
I had
was.
asked that earlier to Mr. Matthews, and he didn't have it at his fingertips.
well, you know
Right,
what?
but-
But he could have gotten it, so don't judge. Maybe
Thank
he
you.
didn't want to answer the question. So I can answer that question after I tell you what I would recommend based on what I think the work is. I think in through this discussion that I think we very well might need more literacy specialists, but if we're going to prioritize, if there's concern around the bottom line, if you ask me off of tier 2 priorities, I would ask you to prioritize 2.0 for the call schedule implementation, understanding that it may not be 2.0, and then the math interventionist. I believe that we can find funding for the items that are below, that are 10, 11, 12 outside. In fact, I'm quite certain we can find 12 based on a conversation I had last night. I would say that holding on a literacy specialist at this point probably does make sense until the ELT comes up with its recommendations and we work through the pilot process. I think it would not be bad for us to wait to see what results from that. In addition to the fact that we are going to be and are working with our existing literacy specialists around what it's going to look like moving forward when we have a one unifying program. So that's what I would say if you're looking for some kind of compromise position. But I also am supportive of the go all in approach. We all know what we're up against, and I'm not sure we're at a point right now where the difference between what I just said and the all in approach is it may be a difference without a distinction at this point.
So
I
I
don't-
think what Dr.
I don't know
Hackett,
that
or I
there's
think
any
I go
difference
back
between.
to, I think I go back to what Dr. Hackett had said earlier on, much earlier on in the discussion, that of the tier 2 priorities, he particularly would recommend at this point in time the McCall schedule implementation, and then the FTEs for that, and then also towards the math interventionists. And I mean, we've been talking a lot about prioritization and prioritization over the 5 years. And I think that even takes place. I mean, clearly he's prioritized here in FY26 with the tier 1 items and then now with tier 2. So within tier 2, Dr. Matthews is saying we prioritize these two, or Dr. Matthews' motion is prioritizing these 2 items. And that I believe is consistent with Dr. Hackett's or recommendation from earlier on. So with that, I would suggest that we move the vote on the amendment of Dr. Matthews.
Dr. Matthews made a new motion. I amended the motion to include everything.
But we have to begin in
Madam Chair, there's an easy way out of this. Let me just withdraw my main motion to begin with. Let me just withdraw my main motion completely. And I'm happy to make
we're starting with the we're starting
because
afresh.
we're just debating amendment to my main motion. So I'm
Right.
happy to withdraw
Okay,
my
that'll make
main
it cleaner.
motion, and I'm happy to make a new main motion to support an FY26 district budget of $70,870,718, which includes the tier 1 recommendations from Dr. Hackett, plus the 2.0 FTE for McCall's schedule and 2.5 FTEs for math intervention as presented, for an increase of 7.15% over FY25.
Second.
Second that. Dr. Matthews and
Thank
I
you.
simultaneously second that.
We'll let Ms.
Thank you.
Allen figure that out on the back end
Yeah.
when she does the minutes.
Exactly.
That's right. All right.
And then I made a motion to amend that motion.
Well, now you are making a motion to amend that motion. So
Well,
just to
I
make
have,
it clean,
but
to make it clean.
to include all of the priorities that we need for FY26 for a budget of $71,128,198 for a budget of 7.53%.
Thank you. Do we have a second? I do not believe we have a second. So with that, I would say that we move back to the main motion that was made by Mr. Nixon for a 7.15% increase, or $70,870,718 for tier 1 items, and the McCall schedule 2.0 FTEs and the math 2.5 FTEs, for which I believe we had a second.
Yeah, a couple
Yes,
of
we
them.
had the 2 seconds. Excuse me. So all in favor, and we will do another roll call vote. Ms. Bergstrom,
No.
Mr. Hopcroft,
Aye.
Mr. Nixon,
Aye.
Dr. Matthews,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye, and that vote is 4-1 in favor of Mr. Nixon's motion.
So I
So
really have to run. I'm testing the chair's willingness to accept a motion to adjourn.
Do we not at least have one
I-
important sort of announcement on a capital item tonight, though, Dr. Hackett and Madam Chair?
We can table
Yes,
it.
we, well, okay.
Or do we not need consent to the committee on that? Because I thought there's a timeliness issue on a grant at McCall.
We, I believe, Mr. Mayor, we are okay. We've confirmed that it can be taken up at the meeting on the 27th. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And Mr. Nixon McCall SOI or Morocco SOI?
That was.
Yeah, I'm
actually-
okay tabling that as well.
Everyone keep an eye on timelines and
All
good
right.
with that too.
Yes, it's due on April 11th. And we'll have it prepared sometime next week for a draft form to have it voted. As you know, it has to be voted by both the committee and the select board.
We have anticipated future agenda items, which you may read. And our next meeting, as has been indicated earlier, is March 27th, next Thursday, followed by a meeting on April 10th. And with that, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Ms. Bergstrom?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Nixon?
Aye.
Mr. Hopcroft?
Aye.
And Dr. Matthews?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. And we are adjourned at 6:58 p.m. Thank you so much, everybody.
Everybody.
That was
Thanks,
Thanks,
Ken.
everyone.
a very
Thanks,
fulsome
everyone.
discussion.
Good work tonight. It was
Thank you.
hard.
That was hard.